My sister didn't look up when my father carried my bag down the stairs. She just kept tearing her dinner roll into little pieces, like this had all been decided before I pulled into the driveway. My mother sat at the kitchen table with both hands around her water glass, calm as church, and said, soft as anything, that Amber needed the house more than I did now. The television was off. The chicken was still warm. Nobody asked if I was all right. I had come home ready to say I'd lost my job that afternoon. 8 years at Meridian, gone with one HR folder and a careful apology. I barely got the words out before Amber asked, "So, who's paying my car note?" That was the moment the room changed. Not because of the question itself, because nobody corrected her. Nobody even acted surprised. My name is Danielle Reed, and by 34, I was old enough to recognize a family decision when I heard one spoken in a gentle voice. What hurt wasn't being told to leave. It was realizing they had already measured what I was worth before I sat down. I was not the child people worried about. Amber got worried. I got relied on. That started so early, I don't think any of us even named it at the time. Amber was 2 years younger, prettier in the easy way that photographs well, the kind of girl teachers called spirited when she interrupted class, and sensitive when she cried afterward. I was the one who remembered permission slips, library due dates, dentist appointments, when Dad's truck tags expired. At dinner, my mother would ask Amber how her day felt. She asked me whether I'd mailed the check. At Thanksgiving, Amber was always allowed to be late. She'd sweep in smelling perfume and cold air, cheeks pink, carrying a pie she bought on the way. And my mother would say, "There she is," like the holiday could begin now. I'd already been there 2 hours, setting out plates, warming rolls, wiping gravy off the stove. Once, when I was 26, I'd gotten up at 5 with the turkey before driving back across town after a full shift. Amber arrived 40 minutes late, with a boyfriend nobody liked, and Dad carved the bird only after they sat down. I remember standing at the sink, with dishwater cooling around my hands, thinking I had somehow become part of the furniture. When I finished college, I did it without a party. There had been money problems that year, and I knew better than to press. My parents took me to Applebee's, just the 3 of us, and Dad paid with a card he ran twice because the machine stalled. 2 years later, when Amber finished cosmetology school after dropping out once already, my mother rented a room at the church hall, ordered sheet cake, and invited cousins from Salem. I told myself it didn't matter. That's what I used to do. Translate pain into practicality and call it maturity. The summer Dad's business failed. The house changed temperature. Not literally, it just felt colder all the time. Papers on the kitchen table. Calls before breakfast. My mother whispered after midnight. I was 15 and working part-time at Safeway, and once I heard Dad say they might lose the house. I put $200 in an envelope from my savings and left it where he'd find it. Then I did it again the next month. And the month after that. 11 months. He never thanked me. He never asked where a teenager got mortgage money either. Years later, I understood that silence wasn't modesty. It was useful being accepted in its most convenient form. Amber, meanwhile, had a way of landing soft. If she overdrew her account, there was always an explanation. If she quit a job after 3 weeks because the manager was weird, Mom said no one should stay where they weren't appreciated. When my car broke down at 29, I took the bus for 6 weeks and didn't mention it until after I'd solved it. When Amber needed a down payment for a newer Honda, the whole table discussed her safety like we were planning a medical procedure. I ended up helping with the paperwork because I was good with numbers. That should have told me something. When Mum had her gallbladder surgery, I was the one at the hospital at 5:30 in the morning with a travel mug and her insurance folder. Amber came by around noon with a latte and stayed 20 minutes. Mom told every relative who called that Amber had been there today. Nobody mentioned I was the one who signed discharge papers, picked up prescriptions, and slept on their couch for 3 nights because Dad couldn't keep the medication schedule straight. I didn't complain. I see now that my silence helped build the version of me they preferred. Even holidays had a pattern. At Christmas, Amber got things chosen for delight. Perfume, boots, a spa certificate tucked in a red envelope. I got practical things. A slow cooker for 1 year. Snow tires money another. Useful gifts for the useful daughter. One December, my mother handed Amber a gold bracelet that had belonged to Grandma Jean. "It just suits her," she said. I smiled so fast my face hurt. Later that night, while stacking wrapping paper into trash bags, I realised nobody had even considered whether it might have suited me too. By the time I moved back into the house in my 30s, temporarily, I already knew the role waiting for me there. The one who notices, the one who covers the gap, the one whose competence gets mistaken for endless capacity. What I didn't fully understand then was that families can build their whole balance around one person standing still. And once they do, they stop seeing that person as someone who might someday need to be held up too. The signs were small at first. That's usually how it happens in families like mine. Nobody gathers in a hallway and announces the betrayal. Things just start shifting out of your reach. One drawer, one conversation, one missing detail at a time. A few weeks before I lost my job, I came home early one Thursday and walked in through the garage. I could hear my mother and Amber in the kitchen, talking low. Not arguing. Worse than that. Coordinating. The second the door shut behind me, everything went quiet. My mother called out, "Danielle!" in that too bright voice people use when they've just slid something off the table before you see it. When I stepped into the kitchen, Amber was holding my mother's checkbook. She set it down fast and smiled like it meant nothing. At the time, I let it go. Later, I remembered how my mother angled the checkbook under a dish towel. Then there was the mail. I'm not a suspicious person by nature, but I noticed patterns. Certified envelopes started showing up more often. Bank logos, loan statements. One afternoon, I saw a letter from Amber's lender tucked beneath a Pottery Barn catalogue on the entry table. My name wasn't on it, but the balance window showed a past due amount before my mother turned it face down. She said it was junk. I said nothing. I had already learned that asking direct questions in that house rarely got direct answers. My father changed too, though in smaller ways. He began speaking about the house as if ownership and usefulness were the same thing. "Amber needs stability," he said one Sunday, while tightening a loose hinge in the hallway closet. Not to me exactly, more like into the room. A woman her age shouldn't be bouncing around. I remember looking up from my laptop and thinking, neither should one my age, but somehow mine didn't count. It was the first time I heard him speak as though my being there was temporary and hers was inevitable. Around then, Amber started acting like decisions had already been made somewhere above my head. She'd leave shopping bags in the guest room. She'd ask if I was still planning to keep my boxes in the garage much longer. Once, she stood in my doorway, holding a dress on a hanger and said, "If I move back for real, we'll have to figure out the closet situation." She laughed after she said it, but not enough to make it a joke. There were other things. My mother asked whether I still had good liquidity after a bonus year at Meridian. Amber wanted to know, out of nowhere, how hard it would be to refinance a car note if somebody had family support. My father asked if I'd updated my beneficiary forms at work, which was not a question he would have thought to ask on his own. It all had the same feel to it. Not curiosity, inventory. What unsettled me most wasn't any one moment. It was the new closeness between my mother and Amber. Doors half shut, their phones face down. Little looks passed across the dinner table that ended when I looked back. I kept telling myself I was being unfair. That stress makes people secretive. That not everything is about me. Still, the air in that house had changed. I could feel it, the way you feel the weather in your joints before the rain starts. By the time I sat down that Tuesday night to tell them Meridian had eliminated my position, I already knew something had been moving under the floorboards. I just hadn't understood yet that they were preparing the house for my absence before I'd even said the words out loud. Dinner was already plated when I came in. Rotisserie chicken, canned green beans, rolls in the basket with the dish towel folded over them. The television was off, which should have told me something right away. In my parents' house, silence during dinner usually meant somebody had already decided how the evening was going to go. I sat down and said I had news about work. My father folded his hands in front of him. My mother didn't start eating. Amber kept looking at her phone until I said Meridian was restructuring and my position had been eliminated. I got as far as, they're offering severance, and Amber cut in. Who's going to cover my car payment? She said it fast, not embarrassed, not even careful, just fast, like that was the first real problem on the table. Nobody corrected her. My mother lowered her fork to the edge of her plate and looked at me with that soft, padded expression she used when she wanted something ugly to sound reasonable. It's just for now, honey, she said, until you get steady again. I remember blinking at her. What is? She glanced at my father then, and that was the handoff. He pushed back from the table. Your sister needs this house more than you do right now, he said. You're resourceful, Danielle. You'll land on your feet. For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. I looked at Amber. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was pulling apart a dinner roll, little pieces gathering by her plate. My mother reached over and refilled Amber's water glass like we were discussing something ordinary. Rent. Weather. A tire rotation. Then my father went upstairs. I heard my bedroom door open above me. Drawer slides, hangers knocking together, the zipper of my duffel bag. Clean, practical sounds. Sounds that told me this had not occurred to him at the moment. He knew where the bag was. He knew which drawer held my sweaters. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the words, the preparation. I sat there another minute at that table, with the smell of chicken skin and black pepper still in the air, and understood something I should have understood years earlier. They were not reacting to my bad news. They were protecting the arrangement that depended on me carrying more than my share. When my father came downstairs with the bag, he set it by the front door without looking at me. You can stay with a friend a few nights, he said. Not can you. Do you have somewhere? Just the next instruction. I picked up my keys, my laptop, and the duffel bag. The porch light was already on. Behind me, nobody followed. Nobody called my name. Marcus didn't ask questions when I showed up at his apartment with a duffel bag and my laptop. He took one look at my face, stepped aside, and put the kettle on. That was his way. No fuss, no performance, just a mug in front of you before the shock had time to settle into your hands. I told him everything in order, because order was the only thing I still had. The layoff at Meridian, the drive home, Amber's question. My father packed my bag like he was doing me the favour of efficiency. Marcus listened from his old armchair, elbows on the sides, fingers linked. When I finished, He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, this wasn't really about one car payment." "No," I said, "it wasn't." I barely slept that night. Not because I was panicking. Oddly, I wasn't. I was too clear for panic. I lay on Marcus's couch in the dark with the blanket folded over me and kept hearing the zipper of that bag from upstairs. The speed of it, the confidence. Like my father had already rehearsed the room in his head. Around midnight, I sat up and remembered the folder still in my car. I went down to the garage in my socks and coat, the concrete damp under the fluorescent lights, and pulled the folder off the passenger seat. The severance papers were on top. Under them was the other file, the one that actually mattered. Reed Analytics, LLC. Acquisition draft. Family buyout option. I sat in the driver's seat with the dome light on and read the escrow page again. I had built Reed Analytics quietly over 4 years with Trevor Nash, a former colleague who knew the product better than people. I had put it in the capital. I had taken control. I had done what I always did, handled the thing that needed handling before anyone else understood its value. The company wasn't flashy. It wasn't the kind of business people brag about at Christmas. But it worked. Regional lenders used our modelling tools. We had recurring contracts. And 6 weeks earlier, a fintech firm out of Austin had made an offer to acquire the whole thing. The number was real. Enough to change my life without making me foolish. Enough, too, that I had done something I'm almost embarrassed to admit now. I had asked my attorney, Kevin Hartley, to create a side option in the closing documents. If I activated it before signing, a portion of my proceeds would be redirected into escrow. Enough to wipe out the remaining mortgage on my parents' house. Enough to retire Amber's car loan. I had planned to tell them at dinner after Thursday's meeting, not because they had earned it, but because some part of me still wanted to believe relief might make us honest with one another. Sitting in that garage, I understood the shape of the insult in a way I hadn't at the table. They had thrown me out over bills I was about to erase. Not only that, they had done it without asking a single question about whether I was safe, whether I had savings, whether I needed time. They had treated me like a broken appliance they needed out of the hallway. That was the first twist. Not that I had money they didn't know about. That part was old. I had been hiding stability from my family for years, because every time they sensed I had margin, they started spending it in their minds. The twist was realizing I had been on the verge of rescuing people who had already made a plan for where to store my boxes. The next morning, I met Kevin in his office in the Pearl District. Grey sky outside. Coffee on the side table. He had the deal packet open and ready by the time I sat down. We went through the acquisition line by line. Representations, warranties, closing timeline. Then he slid the thinner document toward me. 3 pages, clean language. My own handwriting is buried under legal polish. The family option, he said. If you still want to execute it, sign here. I put my hand on the paper and didn't move right away. For years, I had told myself I was different from the rest of them because I could carry more, that I was stronger because I expected less. But sitting there, I saw something I hadn't wanted to see before. I wasn't just generous. I was still negotiating for love in private. Still building little altars out of money and competence and hoping somebody would finally call it devotion instead of duty. Kevin waited. He was good at that. No throat clearing, no pressure. I thought about my father's voice. Your sister needs this house more than you do right now. I thought about Amber standing at the stairs, listening. I thought about my mother's gentle tone. the one she used when the verdict had already been reached. Then I looked up and said, "Remove it." Kevin gave one small nod. "All of it?" "All of it." He drew the document back, marked the file, and set it aside. No drama, no speech. Just one pile becoming another. Something in me went quiet right then. Not cold, not cruel, just finished. When I left his office 40 minutes later, the deal was still moving forward. The company would still sell. My life would still change. The only thing that had changed was who I was taking with me. I stood on the sidewalk outside, listening to a delivery truck idle at the corner, and felt lighter than I had the night before. It hit me then that my family's biggest mistake wasn't throwing me out. It was doing it 4 hours before I stopped trying to save them. The counterattack started in the soft voices first. My mother left a voicemail 3 days after I moved into a furnished studio in northwest Portland. I was unpacking towels when her name lit up my screen. Her message was careful, almost airy. She said she hoped I was okay. She said Amber had been under a lot of strain and that things had gotten emotional. Then, right near the end, she said, "Your sister's doing much better now. Now we miss you. Not your father feels terrible. Just a progress report on the person they had protected from me." I didn't call back. A week later, my father texted, "Call your mother." That was his whole style in the family. My mother handled the temperature. My father delivered the order. I read the message while sitting in a coffee shop with acquisition documents open on my laptop. Then I turned the phone face down and kept reading. Amber tried a different route. She called at 6:47 in the evening, right after dinner, when people are most likely to confuse habit with longing. Her voice was bright, in that practiced way she used when she wanted something without naming it too fast. "Hey, Dan, I've been thinking about you." I said I was fine. She told me Mom and Dad were stressed. She said everything had gotten weird. She said maybe I should come by Sunday dinner and clear the air. It was such a clean piece of manipulation, I almost admired it. No apology, no mention of the bag, no acknowledgement that I had been turned out of the house the same night I lost my job. Just an invitation to step back into my assigned position and make the room functional again. "I can't," I said. She paused. "You can't this week, or—" "I can't, Amber." That silence on her end told me more than anything else. Not hurt, recalculation. Cheerful had failed, and she was already looking for the next tool. Then the financial pressure started to show through the cracks. I cancelled the quiet $400 monthly transfer I had been sending toward my parents' mortgage for 4 years. 2 weeks later, Marcus ran into my father at the hardware store and called to tell me he looked worn down. "Bank issue," Marcus said. That's all he'd say. I knew exactly which issue. Amber went public before she went honest. She put up a Facebook post complaining about their mortgage servicer, tagging the company name and talking about a payment discrepancy nobody could explain. 11 comments under it by the time Marcus sent me the screenshot. Advice. Sympathy. A little performance of unfair treatment for the benefit of casual witnesses. I stared at it for maybe 30 seconds and felt something settle in me. They still thought the problem was happening to them. What hurt more than the money talk was the old family language coming back around it. Selfish, dramatic, unstable. My mother used none of those words directly, but she didn't need to. "We all have to think of the family as a whole," she said in one voicemail. "This distance isn't like you." That was her way of saying my boundaries were a character defect. By then, I understood the real counterattack. They weren't trying to punish me. They were trying to pull me back into the machinery before I fully realized I had stepped out of it. And for the first time in my life, I let the machine run without me. What turned the whole thing from hurt into clarity wasn't one dramatic discovery. It was the way the pieces began to line up once I stopped defending them in my own mind. The first real piece came from my bank records. I was at the little desk in my studio, rain tapping the courtyard window, when I pulled 4 years of transfers into one spreadsheet. 48 payments. $400 each. $19,200 sent quietly to the mortgage servicer through bill pay under a generic line item. I had set it up that way on purpose years earlier, after Dad said they were a little tight, and Mum acted embarrassed for exactly half a second before accepting the help. Looking at the rows all together, month after month, I saw the pattern more clearly than I ever had while living inside it. They had been stabilized by me for years, without ever having to say my name out loud. The second piece came from Marcus. He called after running into my father again, this time outside the bank branch near Cedar Hills. Dad had a folder in his hand, and that tight, flattened look around the mouth he gets when he's trying to keep control in public. Marcus said, "He looked confused, Danielle, not angry. Confused. That mattered. Confusion meant they truly hadn't known where the cushion came from. They had just accepted the landing every month and called it normal. Then Amber left me a voicemail she didn't mean to reveal so much in. Her tone was sharp from the first word. No sweetness this time. She said Mum and Dad were drowning, and that if I had any decency, I would stop making things harder out of pride. Pride. That word stayed with me. Not because it hurt, but because it named their whole story. In their version, I was withholding what properly belonged to the family. My money, my labour, my steadiness, my silence. They still saw all of it as shared property. The last piece was the oldest one. I found it in myself, if I'm honest. I sat there after her voicemail ended and remembered the envelope on Dad's pillow when I was 15. The bus road when my car died. The hospital chair beside Mum's bed. The car loan paperwork for Amber spread across the table while everybody looked to me to make the numbers behave. The evidence wasn't only in documents and payment histories. It was in a timeline I had lived in. That was when the whole puzzle locked into place. They had not suddenly become cruel. They had simply followed a pattern all the way to its logical end. And now that I could finally see the pattern, I was done pretending it was love. Action for me did not begin with a speech. It began with a legal pad, a bank app, and one full Saturday morning in a studio apartment that still smelled faintly like fresh paint and somebody else's laundry detergent. I made coffee in the French press, opened the blinds to the courtyard, and wrote 3 headings across the top of the page. Housing, work, access. Then I filled them in. Housing meant the Portland studio through the end of the month, then Austin. Work meant the acquisition closing and the transition contract. Access meant everything my family still had some invisible claim on, because I had once been foolish enough to confuse availability with love. I changed passwords first. Email, banking, cloud storage, the shared Amazon household account I'd set up for my parents years earlier when my mother got tired of forgetting her login. The Comcast account at the Beaverton house was still in my name because I had fixed it once and nobody ever moved it back. I removed my card from the autopay file and forwarded the confirmation emails into a folder labelled Done. I have always loved that word when it's true. After that, I called the property manager at Cannon Beach. We went over bookings, maintenance, winter storm procedures, key transfer, cleaning fees. Ordinary things. Useful things. There was something steady about discussing cedar siding and guest turnover while the rest of my family was still trying to figure out where the floor had gone. I signed the final management authorization before lunch. By early afternoon, I had a moving checklist for Austin and a shortlist of one-bedroom apartments on the east side. I ran the numbers twice, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted the comfort of precision. My whole life has been shaped by people treating my competence as a public utility. There was a quiet pleasure in aiming it entirely at myself. Marcus came by that evening with Thai takeout and took one look at the legal pad on my counter. "That serious, huh?" "I'm done improvising," I said. He nodded like that made perfect sense. I told him I wasn't going back for dinner, not for reconciliation, not to smooth anything over. If my parents wanted contact, they could speak plainly. If Amber wanted help, she could try earning the cost of her own life for once. Saying it out loud didn't make me feel cruel. It made me feel accurate. The next week, I moved with a kind of calm I had never associated with a crisis before. I bought 2 new towels, a decent lamp, and glass food containers because I was tired of living like my own future was temporary. I forwarded my mail, updated my address, confirmed the wire instructions with Kevin, sent the Austin leasing office my financial documents. Every small step said the same thing. This is mine now. My father texted again midway through the week. "Call your mother." I looked at the screen, then at the folder on my table with Read Analytics letterhead and closing notes clipped neatly inside. For years, that kind of message would have rearranged my whole day. This time, I set the phone aside and finished reviewing the transition agreement first. That was the real shift, I think. Not anger, sequence. I stopped putting them first in my internal order of operations. On Thursday morning, Kevin called to confirm we were still clean for closing. I stood by the studio window while he talked, watching a pigeon circle the drain in the courtyard. When the call ended, I wrote one more heading at the bottom of the legal pad. Boundaries. Under it, I put 3 lines. No money without agreement. No crisis without truth. No family peace purchased with my silence. I kept that page. People talk about turning points like they arrive with thunder. Mine came quietly, with email confirmations and signed PDFs and a suitcase half packed by the door. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was trying, finally, to build a life that did not require me to disappear in order to hold it together. 89 days after my father carried my bag to the porch, Marcus called and said, "Your dad's on my front steps." I was at the coffee shop on Northwest 23rd, halfway through an Americano and a consulting scope document, when my phone lit up. For a second, I thought I'd heard him wrong. My dad? "He's been sitting here for about 10 minutes, Marcus said. "Hasn't knocked again. Just sitting." I looked out the window at the street, wet from morning rain, and felt something low in my chest go still. My father was not a man who arrived anywhere without purpose. He was a planner, a decider. He fixed, directed, and concluded. He did not wait on someone else's steps hoping to be invited in. "Is he all right?" I asked. Marcus took a second. "He looks like somebody who hasn't slept properly in a while." I packed my laptop, left cash under the cup, and drove to Marcus's building on Lovejoy. The sky had that flat Portland grey that makes everything look both muted and sharp at the same time. When I pulled up, my father was sitting on the front steps in his canvas work jacket, elbows on his knees, hands hanging loose between them. He stood when he saw my car. "That old reflex got me," Men his age were raised to stand when a woman approached, and even after everything, there it was. Some forms outlived the feeling behind them. I got out and closed the car door. Dad. He nodded once. Danielle. Neither of us moved right away. Traffic hissed a block over. Somewhere nearby, somebody was unloading glass bottles into a recycling bin. He looked older than he had 3 months earlier. Not dramatically. Just thinner through the face, more worn around the eyes. Like life had finally started charging him interest. Marcus opened the building door before either of us had to decide what came next. "Come in," he said, plain as anything, and stepped aside. He gave us the front room and disappeared down the hall without lingering. That was one of Marcus's gifts. He knew how to be present without crowding the moment. There was already a glass of water on the coffee table. I noticed it because nobody had said they needed one. My father sat in Marcus's armchair. I took the couch. Then I waited, because he had come to me, and I was done doing the emotional labour of opening doors for people who would close them on me. He started on the edges first. This is what my father does when he's wrong. He circles the thing, talks around it, tests the ground before stepping onto it. He told me the mortgage company had sent notices, that they'd spent weeks trying to understand why the payment history looked different than they thought it should. He mentioned Amber's car note in the same tone a man might use to mention weather damage. $610, 2 months behind, then current, then behind again. He talked about hold times, bank statements, and confusion. I let him finish. When he stopped, the room went very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator hum from Marcus's kitchen and the faint rattle of a train somewhere farther off. Finally, I said, "You didn't come here to talk about customer service." He looked at his hands. "No." Another pause. Then he said, "I didn't know about the company." I felt my jaw tighten, just a little. "I know." His eyes came up then. "Why didn't you tell us?" I had imagined that question before, not just in the last 3 months. For years, really. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you ask for help? Why didn't you mention it? Questions that sound innocent until you remember who had the power to ask sooner and never bothered. "Because the minute this family knows I have something," I said, "it stops being mine." He didn't interrupt. I went on. "That's been true since I was 15. He stared at me a second, and I watched the memory find him. Not all at once, more like a light coming up slowly in a room he hadn't entered in years. "The envelope," he said. "Yes." He swallowed. "That was you." I gave him the truth the way he had always given it to me, without padding. 11 months. He leaned back in the chair and rubbed one hand over his mouth. Not crying. My father doesn't cry in front of people. But something in him shifted. Compressed, maybe. Like a structure taking weight it could no longer pretend wasn't there. "I cashed it," he said, mostly to himself. "Yes. And you were a kid." I didn't answer. Some sentences don't need help landing. The silence after that had shaped it. Not empty, full. A room with something broken in the middle of it, and both people finally looking straight at the pieces. Then I said the one thing I had not planned to say unless he forced me to. "I was going to pay off your mortgage." His head lifted. "And Amber's car," I said. I had a clause drafted into the sale, 180,000 set aside. I was planning to tell you at dinner that Thursday. He just looked at me. "I met with Kevin the morning after you threw me out," I said. And I removed it. I have never seen shock arrive quietly before, but that's how it happened on his face. Not some dramatic collapse, just the blood draining out of certainty. He blinked once, then again. "You were going to," he started, but couldn't finish it. "Yes." He bent forward and put his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together so tightly the knuckles went white. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I've been doing this to you for a long time, haven't I?" That was the moment. Not because it repaired anything, it didn't, but because he finally named the thing I had spent most of my life carrying without witness. "Yes," I said. "You have." He nodded once, still looking down. Then he said, "Your mother keeps saying you're punishing us." I let out a breath through my nose. "No. I stopped rescuing you." That one landed too. He sat with it, a long time. Long enough that the sounds outside the building changed. A truck pulling away. Somebody laughing on the sidewalk. The ordinary world going on while mine finally told the truth. When he looked up again, there was no authority left in his face. Only age. Regret, maybe. And something else I had never once seen directed at me from him before. Respect. I stood there. "I'm leaving for Austin in 3 days." He nodded slowly. "The house in Cannon Beach is under management. The sale is closed. The work is lined up. I'm not coming back to Beaverton." He looked like he wanted to argue, but knew better. So instead he asked, "What do I do now?" That question would have trapped the old me. I would have stepped right into it, built him a ladder, made a plan, absorbed the cost. But I had already lived that life. So I gave him only what was true. "You call the hardship department," I said. "You tell them the facts. You stop letting Amber spend money she doesn't have. And you figure out what this family looks like when I'm not underneath it." He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them and nodded. When I walked him to the door, Marcus was in the hallway holding a coffee mug, not listening, just there. My father paused before stepping out. "Danielle," he said. I waited. He looked at me the way he should have looked at me years earlier. Not as a solution, not as a buffer, as a person. I was wrong. Then he left. I stood there with my hand on the door a second after it closed, listening to the building settle around me. No one shouted. No one had begged. No one had won in the flashy sense of it. But for the first time in my life, the truth had been said out loud in a room where it could not be rearranged to suit anyone else. 3 days later, I flew out of Portland with one carry-on, my laptop bag, and a coffee I barely tasted. By then, the money from the sale had cleared. The Austin lease was signed. The consulting work had already started to fill my calendar. Life moves the way it does when a decision has finally been made and your body is still catching up to it. I heard bits and pieces after that. My parents did get the mortgage restructured, though not without a few ugly months and more than one call they had to make without me. Amber sold the Honda the following spring and told people it had become too expensive to maintain, which was one way to describe a life you'd been living on somebody else's steadiness. My mother left 2 voicemails that first winter, both careful, both missing the center. I never stopped loving them. I just stopped volunteering to be the quiet thing holding them up. Austin was warmer, flatter, louder at night. The apartment had live oaks outside the balcony and morning light in the kitchen. Some evenings, I'd stand there with my coffee and feel the old reflex rise in me. The urge to check on everyone, fix something, make a call. Then it would pass. Justice, when it finally came, did not feel triumphant. It felt clean. You can survive a family being broken long before you can admit it was never balanced to begin with. Closing that door didn't heal everything. But this time, I was the one holding the key. Some people don't get pushed out with shouting. Sometimes it happens in polite rooms, over dinner, with soft voices and a chair that was never really yours. If you've lived that kind of silence, you know how long it can take to call it by its name. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, subscribe. This story isn't over.